Hello, everyone. This is Jackson Witzel,
And this is Ivan Lichtenstein.
and you're listening to The Film Pod.
Bum bum bum.
Oh, you brought it back.
I did.
Speaking of bringing things back, we are in the studio today
We
at
are.
Georgia State
The
University.
WRAS.
Yep, where we started our podcast
Well, three
years
ago, yeah.
about 3 years
Around
ago.
the same time, too, that March-April
Yeah.
timeline.
Yeah, it was spring. It was April-ish, whatever. But yeah, so we came back today as a little throwback for y'all, if you remember the old days of the podcast. The reason we stopped filming it in the studio was because Ivan and I stopped living near each other, so it just became more convenient for us to start recording the podcast over Google Hangout. I almost said Google Drive. That would have been weird. We started recording it over Google Hangout and live streaming onto YouTube directly. We even got like a new co-host, Lauren, who's great.
Mm-hmm.
But today we decided we're just going to take things back to the way they were just one last time. And Ivan, explain why that is exactly.
So, this, like Jackson said, this is the original place where we actually did the film pod. We used to do it in a studio. You can see all of the old videos on the channel of different various film pod episodes that were filmed in here. But I will actually be leaving Georgia State University in a little less than a month to graduate. So, we thought for this April edition of the film pod, we'd bring it all back full circle here to where it all started.
Speaking of bringing it back to where it started, if you remember, the very first podcast we ever did was when we did Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice, and today we're going to be talking about a different DC movie, the latest DC movie, as a matter of fact, one that we liked a lot more than Batman vs
A
Superman.
lot more.
Because it was a pretty good review we had. I think our review of Batman vs Superman may have been even better than the movie itself, which some might say is a bold claim. I say not so much, but that movie we didn't like too much. There was a lot of Martha and stuff that was kind of stupid.
And a lot more than that. It was really stupid and made the movie quite awful.
If I remember correctly, Ivan, you didn't like that there were horses in there or something. I don't remember.
Oh yeah, the horse part was stupid.
Yeah, it was pretty stupid. Anyway,
It was really sad too.
Not to digress. Yeah. Not to digress too much, but the DC movie that just came out that we're going to be talking about today is one we both enjoyed quite a bit. It's called Shazam.
Shazam.
And Shazam is starring Zachary Levi, and it was directed by David Sandberg. And basically, I would say so far it's the best DC movie ever made.
I would have to agree on that too.
And when I say DC movie, I mean the DCEU, as the current cinematic universe, not including the Batman, Dark Knight and stuff, because that was obviously better. But
everything within the DCEU.
Yeah, the current DCEU. This is by far the best movie so far. So Ivan, tell us what you thought of Shazam.
Yeah, so Shazam to me was not only a really good DCEU movie, but it was also a really good movie overall. So whether you're not into superhero movies, comic book movies, DCEU, you name it, Shazam is one of those really good time movies that you'll see in the theater.
Yeah, I think for me what made it a really good time was the fact that, I don't know, it gave me some sort of Sam Raimi Spider-Man vibes. I mean, I know I'm not the first to say that. A lot of people also agree with me on that. But it took the idea of okay, kid gets superpowers, kid has fun with superpowers. That's realistically what would happen. You're not automatically going to get superpowers and be like, I have to save the day, I have to go stop crime. Most kids are going to be like, well, how can I exploit these powers and have fun with them? And they showed us every possible hilarious scenario that would come out of a 14-year-old kid getting superpowers, just inexplicably one day, and it's the comedy in the movie is really top notch, really funny.
It really does. No, that was the thing too that surprised me, because I know there were some smigglings of DCEU trying to copy off the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a way of throwing in comedy in there. And I think one of the problems that DCEU had in the past was that they tried to make it too much like Marvel, where they made it really dark and depressing, and just didn't really. It came off as just really too much, and it didn't really please fans. Whereas in Shazam, it's a really good mix of some of that, a little bit of darkness, a little bit of comedy, and a little bit of light-hearted action fun. And I think this also does depend on the director too, David Sandberg, because like Sam Raimi, connecting that point, Sam Raimi, famed director of the Evil Dead movies, went on to make Spider-Man, with some of those stylistic choices still in there from Evil Dead, but being put into Spider-Man. you have the same thing going on with David Sandberg, who directed a lot of horror movies. He has that same style, those same stylistic elements of those movies being put into Shazam, and it pays off really well when you see it.
For example, yeah, there is this one scene, and we're not going to go into spoilers, but there's this one scene very reminiscent of like a horror movie. It's very similar to the scene in Spider-Man 2 with Doc Ock in the like on the operating table in the hospital, and that it's very stylistically just horror. And this movie does that too. I think it works really well. It is a little off-putting because a lot of the rest of the movie is like very kid-friendly, and then that one scene in particular is really dark. But the movie also starts off pretty dark too. Like the intro, where we get to learn something about the villain, is pretty dark. And I think potentially like you could argue that the tone is a little inconsistent because of the fact that it goes really dark at times and then goes really lighthearted. But I don't know. I do think that this is aimed at a little bit more of a teenage audience than like for little kids, because I mean there's a lot of adult jokes and a lot of like swearing here and there. So I mean like I wouldn't suggest bringing a kid that's under like 8 to this movie, but I mean like between the ages of like 12 and or 10 and 16 or something.
You're hitting
I
your
think,
market when you do that.
yeah.
I think.
I mean, I think you definitely have a target demographic here, but really, I mean, as an adult watching this, I like had a great time, and I thought it was just really fun.
No, I had a really good time too, like watching this. When I was watching it, I was just thinking to myself, please don't be like every other DCEU movie when it starts off, because this isn't really a spoiler, but it starts off with Zachary Levi as a little kid, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm getting Batman versus Superman vibes already, just like thinking about it as an origin thing. But it does that, and then the rest of the movie, it's pretty well paced, like as far as that goes. Would you agree, Jackson, that this
Yeah,
has
my
really
only
good pacing, especially for a DCEU movie?
yeah. Well, for me, I did have a couple pacing issues, but
Really?
I thought overall the pacing was
Really?
good. Well, I mean, the first 30 minutes when he like before he gets his powers, I think it goes a little slow. I mean, it takes its time. I'm not going to complain about that. And then I also kind of thought the end fight scene, the climax went on just I don't know, maybe 5 minutes too long.
I'll agree with you on that.
Yeah, like it just got to the point where they kept adding and adding and adding, and everything they added to the fight was really good and really funny. It just I don't know, went on a little long, and so I would say like pacing wise, the middle of the movie is paced perfectly. The beginning is paced a little slowly, but I mean it does help you get sort of like adjusted to the universe and kind of the different things it's setting up. And then the ending, yeah, could definitely have they could have chopped a little bit off of it because it was a 2 hour movie that felt a little longer than 2 hours. But to be honest, like I don't really have issues with the tone at all. The pacing, like I said, I think that was really my only real gripe about the movie. I mean, I don't think every single performance in the movie is super memorable, but there wasn't like a bad performance that stuck out to me at all.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything bad. It was more a lot with me in this movie. Some of the negatives I took away is that I feel like I'm gonna watch it over and over again. I feel like it'll get worse every time I watch it. I feel like it doesn't really have a lot of replay value for me, as a movie as a whole. But there's just specific scenes in that movie that I could replay and then get a form of enjoyment out of it. So in terms of like the whole movie, there's not a lot of enjoyment if you're gonna watch it every single time repetitively.
Hmm.
But as far as like choosing pinpointing scenes, pinpointing moments, the movie executes that professionally and really well.
I could definitely see myself watching this one again. I wouldn't say I would rewatch it to the level of like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, but
No,
again,
it does not
I
have
have
that replay value at
nostalgic
all.
connection to those movies, so that could be partially why. And I don't think stylistically this movie is like shot on that same level of Sam Raimi. It's not as artistically done, and it doesn't quite feel like a comic book the way those movies did.
Hmm.
This movie feels more like just a regular superhero movie, but I don't know. I do think like the performances are like the leads. Zachary Levi and I forget the kid's name, his like stepbrother in it, but those two have amazing chemistry, and their relationship I thought really was what held the film together for like the majority of it, and really by the end of it, you really sort of feel for this like little family of kids, and like emotionally I felt like pretty invested, especially as it went on. And then later on, there's sort of a twist with the main kid.
Oh, are you
No,
spoiling stuff?
no. I'm not saying what it is. I'm just saying there's a little bit of a twist later on involving his parents or mother or whatever. And I thought like that twist really hit emotionally, and it really made the overall theme of the film, like I think really play out well. And I think that the dynamic between Shazam and the rest of the cast, I don't know. I thought they had a good camaraderie, especially by the end. Like I really enjoyed seeing them, and would definitely love to see a sequel with all of them together again. So
They had a really good casting going along with the movie, like you said, and I thought the camaraderie worked really well. There was just one scene, well, not really a scene, but this moment of the movie that was really like, I hate to use the word repetitive again, but repetitive from other movies that I've seen in the past, where two characters are bonding, they get into a fight, they break that bond for a little bit, and then they get back together at the end. And I've seen it so many times in movies, and I'm tired of it. I got really tired of it in this movie. Because they did the same thing, and it was
mhm.
just like, oh my god, I'm predicting everything that's about to happen right now.
I will agree and disagree with you at the same time. I agree that that trope is really overdone, and it's kind of annoying. And I do think that like um, some I think it might have been the Nostalgia Critic review of the first Shrek movie that kind of pointed out that trope to me, where he was sort of talking about how like there's that scene where there's the misunderstanding, and Shrek and Fiona are both sad, and the movie just kind of sulks for like 10 minutes. This movie sort of has that, but I don't feel like they spent a lot of time on the sulking, like the oh the two characters are sad and they're not working together anymore. Like it didn't. It pretty quickly like went from that conflict to like escalating to the climax, and so it didn't spend a ton of time on that. And I also thought that like the that conflict between the two main characters, I thought it really worked well for this story because they're both supposed to be kids, like young
Right.
teens, and uh, they're also like that dynamic between the characters. One is wanting to form that kind of brotherly relationship, and the other one he's emotionally isolating himself, and he's a bit more standoffish. So I think that that conflict flowed pretty naturally out of those characters, and especially when you add in the whole superpowers and um, how he's kind of abusing his powers, and I don't know. I think it like works pretty well in terms of like what makes sense for those characters. But as a whole, I don't care for that trope either, and that's why I was glad that they moved on from it pretty quickly. I feel like they didn't linger on it for too long, which I think is good.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not really a big deal anyway, in any way, shape, or form. That's gonna like change my thoughts on the whole movie, which is something I thought I would point out.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, you definitely. I think with this movie, there are certain things about it that like maybe certain people's preferences. It might like certain things in it might have bothered me, and it wouldn't have bothered you, and then other things might have bothered you and not me. And that just comes down to like sort of nitpicky a little bit because it was overall really good.
yeah, no, it was good, pretty good, pretty good.
Any other thoughts on it, Ivan? Was there
I
anything else that you wanted to talk about, or
I don't really.
I thought the special effects were pretty good.
Yeah, they were good.
I like. This isn't really much spoilers. I mean, because it's in the trailer, but there's this one scene where he's trying to like fly, and he ends up like accidentally kind of jumping into a building like through a window.
Yeah,
And I thought that that looked pretty good. Like it looked kind of it was shot. So certain action parts looked a little bit like Man of Steel, but I thought it worked in a funny way because of the fact that like it's a little shaky cam,
yeah,
and it looked and the kid is filming him, so it's like sort of shaky cam, and he looks up and he just crushes through the window, and you hear the screams, and it's um I don't know. I thought that, that kind of style of like how it looks it's a little rough at
right.
times. I thought that really worked because it sort of sold it in a comedic way. Where if
Hmm.
as Man of Steel kind of did that, but it was meant to be serious, so it, like this kind of shaky cam at times made it look cheaper. Whereas in this, I thought it was a good stylistic choice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to say about the special effects. Is the most I'll say is that they were good and nothing looked cheap, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean it was fairly standard in that department. Let me think. So we talked about cinematography, the effects, the actors. You said you didn't have a problem with any of the performances.
Nope.
No, we talked about the style of it. Let's talk a little bit more about the comedy though. So
Okay.
I know that the comedy in this is a bit more Marvel, but I what I liked about it was a comedy with heart, and I don't feel like a lot of the Marvel movies are like that. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy kind of is, but and maybe Spider-Man: Homecoming was a little bit, but for the most part, those movies, while I really enjoy the Marvel movies, they tend to go for um, usually more of a kind of grand scale with sort of comedy as like a backdrop, whereas this movie, I guess, focused more on the comedy and had like this sort of more serious story in the backdrop. Um, and I don't know. I guess it classifies it as more of a comedy than a serious movie, but I thought both elements of it worked.
Right. No, I mean, I don't know. I just don't really have like a lot to say about the comedy because it's like it's not one of those things where it's
Hmm.
like, oh, there's comedy in a superhero movie. It's like new thing. It's like cool, innovative. Because we've seen that before in Deadpool. We've seen that in a lot of the Marvel movies. Like
Yeah.
it's been around, and so for the DCU to like actually be putting comedy into Shazam, they're a little late in the game, but hey, you know what? It still works. So I'm not
Yeah.
complaining about that. Um, but I just don't have anything to say like along the lines of like this joke really worked really well because I don't
Uh-huh.
remember a lot of the jokes in the movie, except for some of the portions where they're like learning the superpowers and like getting along with that. Some of the comedy arises out of there.
Yeah.
That's where I thought the comedy like really peaked and worked really well in Shazam.
To me, I thought some of the comedy was kind of 80s a little bit because it went kind of a little further than a lot of movies would today. I thought like some of the jokes, and this isn't spoiling much, but the jokes where they're getting beer, the jokes where they're at the strip club, like that felt kind of like a joke that you would put into like an 80s movie about
Mm-hmm.
a kid fantasy, versus now where people would try to play it a lot more safe. They wouldn't probably wouldn't go there, um, especially with kids as young as they were. But I liked it. I thought that they really made good use of the actors' talents, and I didn't think any of the jokes went too far, but I also thought that they went sort of far in the right way. Like it was, I don't know. I felt like the comedy stylistically kind of went back a bit to like the '80s, and I think part of that is that the movie, in a lot of ways, is sort of an homage to Big, and they even have
Mm-hmm.
that little reference in there. Did you notice the Big reference?
I
When
never saw Big.
oh, you never saw Big? Okay, you got to
Yeah.
see that movie. That's a great movie.
Oh,
Um,
I mean, I saw like the piano one.
the piano
I mean,
scene.
everyone knows that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was sort of a little Easter egg, but uh, if you look at that relationship though between the kid who becomes an adult and then the kid best friend, uh, it's very similar to the sort of dynamic that they had in Big, and so I liked that they were kind of making an homage to that movie because, for one, that movie is really good, and just the fact that I thought that like this, it's cool to see a superhero movie because superhero movies are like that dominating like force right now in theaters. It's good to see that they can still sort of take a note from like some of the classics,
Mm-hmm.
and it was sort of in the way that Spider-Man: Homecoming was kind of an homage to the John Hughes movies. So I like that they're kind of making these little references now. I think I don't know. It ties it in well with like modern movies with some of the classics of the past, in my opinion. So Ivan, I think that's about all we have to say
Yeah.
about Shazam. What would you rate this movie?
I'm gonna give Shazam a 6 out of 10.
All right, and I'm going to give Shazam an 8 out of 10. So, Ivan, this is our last recording in this
It
office.
is.
Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah. This is the last recording in the office, but that's okay because you can watch this video forever and ever and ever. Yeah,
And ever.
and never.
Yeah, I mean, it just brings back a lot of memories, man. I mean, I'm glad that we could just talk for a minute or two here.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we decided to create a podcast. I don't remember if it was my idea or your idea originally.
It was
Um,
mine. Well, you talked about we kind of both talked about
we
it.
came up with different elements of the idea. I
Yeah.
feel like
I secured
I
like
f-
the space and everything.
yeah,
and all
I
that.
feel like I came up with the initial idea of just saying, let's do a podcast because you and I were talking about movies a lot when we first met. And I think I initially said something, I don't know what it was. I just said something about, like, hey, a podcast where we're talking about movies would be cool. And then you were like, hey, I've got this connection with the radio station.
Yeah.
I know this guy who knows a guy or something. And so originally we were making the podcast for Georgia State, weren't we? For the,
Mhm.
what was it, the Digital Media Group or something?
Yeah, digital media group.
Yeah, so we started off and we talked about a couple movies. I think we talked about Spider-Man.
I
And
don't
we
even
talked
know where
about,
those videos are anymore.
we talked
at this
about,
point.
yeah, I don't know. Well, some of them didn't even end up online.
Yeah.
We did one about our top 10 movies or top 5 movies of 2015 or worst movies of 2015. And then that's sort of how we started talking about Jurassic World because you hated that movie. And
Yeah.
but then I think because the Digital
Good
Media Group
times.
ended up not working out, we both just decided we were like, why don't we just upload it onto my channel? I already
Yeah.
have
And
a
then
subscriber base, and
I knew one buddy who used to
Yeah.
be here, Christian, his name is.
Mhm.
He messaged me one day saying, "Hey, if you ever still want to record, I'll help you out in the studio." And I'm like, "Sounds dope." And I used to work here a lot with the newscasting and production. inside the studio at WRAS. I no longer do that, but I have all the experience going into it, so I'm able to do it like on my own without anyone's help, just being here
That's great,
and doing
man.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad we started this though. So we may be done recording in this office, but there's still a lot of the film pod to go. We have a ton of ideas for the different shows we're going to do over Google Hangout for you guys. And in addition to that, I'm also starting a couple of side projects. One, I'll go ahead and talk about it. I'll just briefly mention it right now. Myself and a couple of other friends are going to start doing a Disney podcast, which will be starting hopefully soon. Mostly because Ivan doesn't like talking about all this Marvel and all that.
I think they already know that.
Yeah, they know that. So we're starting that up pretty soon, and then I'm also going to be getting some guests on for some kind of like guest pod type thing. So definitely look forward to that in the future. But that's all I have to say for today. What about you, Ivan?
I have nothing to say. I mean, I think you pretty much said it. This is the last one we're doing in the studio, but we're still going to continue it on, so you can look forward to me and Jackson's talking faces about movies a couple times or once every month.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for listening. My name is Jackson Witzel,
My name is Ivan Lichtenstein.
and you've been listening to The Film Pod.
Bum, bum, bum.